This is the Clean Soul Podcast, and I'm Dennis Curtis, your host. Today's podcast is to complain or not. Complaining can be a dangerous thing, and there's plenty of tough times in our day that can give way to complaining. I want to look at a series of complaints in the Bible and get an understanding of the result. The setting is one that most of us are familiar with. The children of Israel, who had just come out of Egypt. But this was not an ordinary rescue. It was clearly supernatural. Supernatural after supernatural event catapulted this non-combatant slave group out of the clutches of the superpower nation of its day. There was an open supernatural conflict between God and Satan. Very interesting to read about and study. It was an open display of power move after power move until God's power dominated the war. God was by far the clear winner. Egypt ejected Israel for fear of annihilation. This is the background of the freed slaves as they came out of Egypt with God's promise of a land flowing with milk and honey, of fruit trees and houses already built. But before the rewards, testing was in their future. The first test came just days after the supernatural encounter with God's power, as they were between the Red Sea and the mighty Egyptian army, coming ready to kill. Exodus 14:11 through 12 says, "They said to Moses, 'Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us out away into the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what was said in Egypt to you? Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness.'" This statement is not a statement of faith. Remember, faith is hearing God's promises, believing them so as to act upon them. Instead, they feared due to the circumstances. They believed a lie and spoke it out. Now, the circumstances were real, in their face. It was a life or death situation, even though they feared after their amazing rescue. I have a sense here that God was still showing them His power and still trying to develop faith. A 3 days journey into the desolate desert brought this 2 to 3 million person caravan to a bitter watering hole. At this point, they grumbled against Moses in a need for water. After supernatural water purification, God lays out the directions for faith. Listen to my voice, do what is right, and obey me. Simple stuff, right? After the 45th day on their trek, in Exodus 16:2 and 3, they grumbled against Moses again, this time out of hunger. Another miraculous answer, manna. Let's define grumbling at this point. It's like a whispering slander with a sense of stubbornness. Sometime later, they needed water again, but this time they quarreled. Instead of underneath their breath, they came right out in the open and started arguing with Moses. This was a step up in their complaining, or should I say a step down. During the 3rd month of their freedom, clothed in smoke, fire, with lightning, and with the sounds of trumpet blasts, the Lord Himself appears to Israel and gives them the 10 Commandments, many laws, and promises. The people are so taken back that they tremble. They stand away in reverent fear, and they promise obedience. Even 70 of the elders get to see the Lord in this powerful glory, and they eat and drink in His presence. It's a great area of Scripture to read. This is a supernatural event beyond my ability to accurately describe. I encourage you to read it for yourselves. After all this, a short time later, while waiting for Moses to return from God's presence, the Israelites make idols to replace God. This rebellion led to idol sacrifice and indulging in unrestrained activities. The consequences of this sort of idolatry was severe. A short time later, the people of Israel set out from Mount Sinai towards the Promised Land. This time, they complained to the Lord of their tough situation. They wanted meat to eat and complained of the manna and remembered the food back in Egypt. Sometime later, after the spies had come back from the Promised Land, in fear they gave a bad report. The people raised a loud cry, and they cried all night in fear. They grumbled against Moses and Aaron and wanted to choose a new leader to go back to Egypt. Complaining in these cases is an act of fear, belief in the worst to come. It deludes the mind of truth and faith. It removes the promises of God from our thinking. The grumbling continues, but added to it, 3 men despise the Lord and lead a host of people to overtake the leadership of Moses and Aaron, a mutiny. Time after time, they fail to trust God's promises. The grumbling leads to complaining. Complaining leads to rebellion. Rebellion leads to despising even the Lord. I've seen this happen. It's a dangerous thing. We all need certain things: food, clothing, shelter, and in our modern world, there's a few other necessities. But we must pay attention to our heart's motives. When the things of the world become more important than our love and devotion to and for God, we have a problem. If this problem turns to complaining and grumbling, know that we are headed in the wrong direction. In Philippians 4:11 through 13, Paul gives us some wise words. He says, "For I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how it is to be brought low, and I know how to abound in any and every circumstance. I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me." The more I think about it, we are in a similar situation as the Israelites of old. God has provided His Son, Jesus Christ, to take our sinful place so that we may have new life, abundant life. This is a supernatural event, a supernatural provision. Let's learn from their example and work towards a life without complaint. I have thought about this a lot as I prepared this podcast, and I know it's going to be a process for me. Won't you join me in replacing complaining with remembering the good things and thanking God for them in the middle of our troubles? And sure, we're going to have troubles, and we can replace the complaining with prayer. This has been the Clean Soul Podcast with Dennis Curtis.